Welcome. Welcome to class number 2, Gardening for Beginners, week 2. And this, we're going to talk about how does your garden grow. So anyway, I think we're pretty excited about our offering this week, as hopefully you'll enjoy it. So let's talk about this week's class. First, we're going to review very briefly last week's class. We'll do a seedling progress. As you know, Susan planted some radishes and some peas, so we'll show you the progress there. Louise will talk about some garden sketches. I'll talk about plant parts and how they grow and reproduce. Denise will talk about types of plants, and Louise will give you some research tools. And Denise will do garden design, and then Paul will cover the homework. So that's what the class looks like. So let's talk about very briefly. Last week class, we talked about hopefully the joys of gardening, right place, right plant, right place. We talked about climate. We talked about the sun, the soil, the space, and the water, and then we had some homework, analyze your garden. We did have a couple questions, 2 things we thought we'd address. And again, Anne will be addressing the questions that you put in the chat, but there are 2 things that let's talk about. One, there was questions, we talked a little bit about alfalfa pellets. So alfalfa pellets, it's organic fertilizer. It's slow fertilizing. There are other parts. That's not the only way to fertilize. Most of us use some other types of organic fertilizer, but certainly alfalfa pellet is another way of using organic fertilization, and it's not the only way. The other thing they want to know about some of the advantages of raised beds. So I happen to have all raised beds in my garden, and a couple of things that actually more than a couple of things that come to mind is you don't want to walk on the raised bed, so that's kind of easier to keep people from compacting the soil. Also, when they're up a little bit higher, it's easier to access. So anyway, easier on your back. I think you get a little bit better drainage. It's easier to amend the soil. If you have gopher problems, you can actually line the bottom with some hardware cloth. So anyway, that's just some of the advantages of raised beds. So I guess now it's time for the seedlings progress. So Susan?
Okay, if you wanted to stop sharing, Bob.
I will do that. Okay.
All right. So if you recall last week, I planted 2 types of seeds, one with instant reward and one with a little bit longer time to get rewarded by a growth. The first one here that you could see has come up quite nicely. These are the radish seeds. I sprinkled those in this pot and I covered them with soil, about 1/4 of an inch of soil. And in this cup, you recall, I planted pea seeds. And I don't know if you can actually pick it out, but there's one pea seed that has started to make its growth visible on the surface there. So in the class last time, I planted the seeds, I covered them with the soil at the recommended depth, and then I watered them in. And I just took these pots outside and put them on my garden table. I didn't add any warmth underneath them. They weren't necessarily in the sun. I was just putting them out there to have them out of the way. And you can see you're rewarded with, in this particular kind of seed, with good growth because they don't require special care. Now I have both of these. I also, as a little experiment, and on the 4th week, I'll go outside and take a picture. I planted these on Friday, and in my own garden, I planted several rows of radishes. And I'm hoping that on the 4th week, I'll be able to go out there and pull up a radish and show you how fast those radishes do come up. So light is not necessary for the growth of these particular kinds of seeds. There are some seeds that do require light, but generally they are much smaller and they're not the ones you're going to necessarily be using as a beginning gardener. So if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat and we'll deal with them as we go further through the program. All right, Bob, back to you.
Okay, let me get back to the class. Okay, I think what we have next is Denise, or rather Louise. Are you going to review some garden sketches?
I sure am, Bob. If you can give us slide control.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, you got it.
So in your homework last week, which a bunch of you did, I was really thrilled to get a bunch of these drawings that folks did. And I'm going to share 3 with you. They're different sorts of drawings, and I really wasn't going to make any recommendations to folks based on these. We're not here to tell you what to do or how to do it in a specific way. But I did want to show kind of the variety of the way people think about their gardens, and also specifically how these 3 folks that I'm going to share, how they looked at the sun. This first one is a diagram of a pretty small yard that's devoted entirely to vegetables in containers. And you can see all the containers are laid out. This person has made some great plans for what they're going to grow. But in particular, you can see in the upper left, there's a really nice compass rose that shows north, south, east, and west. So this person knows that the sun light is coming from the south up into this yard. So it's south facing yard. There's quite a lot of light there. And then you can see kind of in the middle right, there's some blue ink there that says sun shade line 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. So this person's really paying attention to where the sun and the shade is in this garden. And that's going to be super important for the health of the vegetables as this person grows these vegetables. And let's see, the next one I'm going to share with you is a larger yard, and lots and lots of different plants here, and some raised beds and a patio. So this person has marked a lot of the different infrastructure that they have, and also the key plants. Obviously, they're going to change plants because they're going to put different things in, but the key plants and the main infrastructure and things are there. Again, the sun on this one is, or the compass is indicated on the upper left with the arrow that shows north. That means that the sun in this case is coming over the house into the garden from the south, towards the north. And that's going to really create a lot of shady areas up against the house here. And you can see where this person has marked shade afternoon, morning sun, and that kind of thing. Shade up over on the left at the bottom, shade. So there's going to be a lot of shade in that area that's blocked, where the sun is blocked by the house. And then the person has marked where there's full sun out by the raised beds. So again, a really nice analysis of where the sun is, which, if you can't tell, I think is like one of the most important things for our plants to be happy. And then the last one I want to share with you is just a delight because of all the colors, and not so many plants already marked here. This is really mostly an analysis of again, sunlight, and kind of like just an indication of here's the lawn, here's some bushes. This yard, again, you can see the N arrow where the north is. So the sun is coming from the right towards the left, and that makes it a really sunny yard. Again, there's going to be shade up by the bedrooms, the master bedroom, and up by the front door, but in the morning. But mostly there's going to be a lot of sun in this garden. And again, the person has marked where the sun is and then where some of the key infrastructure is. So anyway, I just wanted to share those with you. It's really exciting that people are looking at their yards and trying to figure out how their garden space is going to meet the needs of the plants that they want to grow. Back to you, Bob.
Oops. Okay, we're going to talk about how plants grow and reproduce. Kind of an important part of understanding gardening is to understand how plants, how they grow and how they reproduce. So I want to give you kind of a brief overview of this. Okay, let's start. This is basically a plant. We'll go through, the various parts of the plant, give you a little bit of information on those. So let's start with the ground. Okay, this is ground up with the roots. The roots gather nutrients and water from the soil and transplant it up through the stem. It's the xylem is actually, there's vascular systems. The xylem is the one that takes all the nutrients from the roots and distributes up the plant. There's another phloem, another vascular system, which is taking the photosynthesis and all the nutrients, not the nutrients, but the sugars, and brings it down to the plant and feeds the roots. So we've also got the leaves, and that's where the photosynthesis happens. And Denise will go into more details. So if you ever wonder why leaves turn kind of a reddish orange or yellow in the fall, Denise has a story. And then there's the fruit. The fruit is actually where the plant does the reproduction. Often the flowers, we think we grow flowers for just the ornamental and how pretty they look, but actually for the botany, many vegetables are the fruit of the plant. For instance, tomatoes, eggplant, peas, cucumbers. That's where the fruit gets produced and in turn the seeds. So the other thing is right here is the growing tip. Growing tip is where the new growth happens. Some plants have only one main growing tip, and others naturally branch out from the buds. But we'll talk a bit more in the next slide. So this slide is kind of the setup for a little more detail on what happens. So let's move on. Okay, this is the growth occurs in plants in basically two areas. There's the primary meristems, and then there's the secondary. Growth in these plants, the meristems are basically rapidly dividing cells. And so these things are, you see that one's right there. So it's growing up, and also you have meristems that are growing in the roots too. Think about tree branches, and we'll talk a little bit about that, but the same growth pattern occurs in the roots. So basically there's growth in the roots and there's growth in the tip. So I guess if you humans basically have a root and shoot apical meristem. So new growth would be at the top of our heads and the tip of our fingers and toes. I'm sure that would work. But anyway, that's kind of how it works. So a little more detail. So why did I show this one? I'm not obviously recommending anybody carves in the trees, but I want to make it a demonstration here, maybe give a concept. Trees grow at the tip of their branches instead of the base of the trunk. So if, let's say you're finished your growing spurt, you're 25 years old, you come upon this carving, and we're not recommending you do this, and you look this carving right in the eye. If you come back 25 years later, you'll still look at this carving right in the eye. The tree will have grown up and the roots would have grown down, but this trunk would have stayed at the same level. Now, the other thing would have happened is the secondary meristems, which basically there's a sheet in between the bark and the wood, that would have expanded. So this thing would have gotten a little bit wider. But again, the point of all is trees grow from their tips and from their roots, which is the primary meristems. And then the secondary is they get wider. So if, and I guess that's a lot like people, we stop growing, although our secondary meristems do and kick in because they make us whiter. So anybody who makes an observation that you're getting a little bit heavier, you just say, I'm really not growing heavier. I'm just engaging my secondary meristems. So I'm not sure that will make you feel any better, but anyway, that's how trees work. Moving on. Now, we talked about the meristems, on the branches, the buds, they grow up, and also the roots grow down. This is not necessarily how all trees grow. You see it just not straight down. How trees basically grow is they grow out wide and wider than kind of the drip line. So that's typically how the trees grow. Okay, now I'm going to give you, this is about the parts of a flower, and we're going to have a very brief PG rated birds and the bees discussion. Now, I can remember many years ago when I was about 12 years old, my dad took me aside and said, well, son, it's time for the birds and bees discussion. So we had the birds and bees discussion. And after that, he had asked me if there are any questions. And being kind of a wise guy, I said, so Dad, where do the birds and bees come into this deal? So I'm going to show you where the birds and bees come into this deal. Let's talk about the parts of the flower. You've got the petal. The petal is very brightly colored, and everything has a purpose. And the reason the petals are brightly colored is to attract insects, because if we'll talk about insects are necessary. Also, we've got the anther here. That is holds the male pollen. So in order for a seed to be produced, this male pollen has to get over here into the female stigma. So it's important to note that the goal of every living organism, including plants, is to create offspring from the next generation. And one of the ways that plants can produce offspring is by making seeds. So seeds contain that genetic information to produce a new plant. So how does the pollen here from the anther get to the stigma? The next slide is my high production slide. Many hours went into producing this. Hopefully you're impressed. Okay, little animation here. By pollination, that's how it gets, the male pollen in the anther gets to the female stigma. Pollination is the usually unintended consequence of an animal's activity on a flower. So what happens is the insect, like I said, attracted by the color of the pellet, comes on, and in the flower there is the collecting pollen it needs for its protein and other nutritional characteristics, or it's sipping nectar. Anyway, it needs to go to the flower. It gathers those things. And during this process, some of the pollen from the anther is attached to the insect's body. And when the insect moves to another plant, it comes off and attaches hopefully to the anther. So flowers rely on vectors to move the pollen. Now the vectors can be birds, insects, butterflies, bats, and other animals, but it can also be wind and water. If you notice with corn, they plant it in blocks because corn gets pollinated, by the wind. So plants can be self-pollinating, which means they've got all what they need right there, or they can be cross-pollinating, which they need the insects to fly from different plants to plants that planted in different areas. The other thing you might notice if you've ever grown squash, sometimes you'll see there's a kind of a stunted squash plant. And that's really the reason that happens is kind of insufficient pollination. Because what happens with a squash plant is the male flower flowers at a different time than the female plant. So sometimes you're going to need other plants, insects to visit from other plants to come back and pollinate the stigma from that. So that's what I've got for the pollination. And I think we've got Denise, do you want to talk about types of plants?
Okay, I'm Denise, and I'm going to talk about types of plants. Plants can be grouped into a lot of different categories. The ones we're going to talk about today are annuals and perennials, because plants are either annual or perennial, and also deciduous or evergreen. So annual plants are plants that grow, flower, produce, and then die all in one year, usually in just one season. Most vegetables like tomatoes, lettuce, beans, cucumbers, peppers, and so on, all of those are annuals. And many garden flowers are annuals too, from little marigolds to huge sunflowers. Sunflowers can grow up to 12 feet tall, and they do it all in one year, produce, and then die. Some herbs are also annuals, like basil and cilantro. Now, some of you may know that, for instance, where you come from, tomatoes and peppers live for years. And some of you asked about tomatoes, peppers, and eggplants that are still alive from last year. Well, tomatoes and peppers are examples of plants that can be perennials, but usually die in the winters here. That's where that USDA climate zone comes in. So what is a perennial as opposed to an annual? I think I'm advancing to the next slide here. Perennial plants are ones that can live for many years in the right climate and with the right conditions. Remember the USDA and sunset zone maps. Hardy to zone 9 or zone 15. Annual plants don't get hardiness ratings because we don't expect them to survive over the winter. Trees, shrubs, and most landscaping plants are perennials. Fruit trees and berries are perennials. The landscape plants in the picture on the right, all of those are perennials. And most grasses and many herbs, such as rosemary, sage, and chives, are perennials. For some perennials, such as bulbs like daffodils and lilies, the leaves and everything above the ground dies back. But when the time is right again, the plant regrows from the roots. With our mild winters, we have many perennial plants to choose from that are hardy in our zone. Sometimes plants are perennials in some climates, but planted as annuals in another climate. For instance, we plant tomatoes and peppers as annuals in our climate. One slightly confusing point, the word perennial is commonly used to refer to non-woody ornamental plants as a class of plants. For instance, when you go to the nursery, you'll see a whole section on perennials, and they're talking about smaller plants that flower. They will live year to year, but they don't grow into big shrubs or big trees. In the picture above on the right, some of these are what you would see in the nursery as perennials, the little flowering ones, the smaller ones, and other ones would be sold as shrubs, but all of them are perennials. And what's coming up next is a picture of annuals mixed with perennials. This is there are some plants you may think are perennial because you always see them in the same place year after year, but they might actually be growing, making seeds, dying off, and then growing again from seeds every year. In this picture, a classic California wildflower combination. The blue lupins are perennials, but the California poppies, which is the state flower, by the way, is an annual that grows from seed every year. And if you plant poppies, you'll see they continue to come up year after year. When we talk about annuals and perennials, we're also talking about weeds. Some weeds can be annual and some weeds are perennial. If you have a weed pest that you are dealing with, it's often useful to know what kind of weed it is. With either one, killing them before they make more seeds is important. But for perennial weeds, you will also need to dig out or otherwise control the roots to keep them from coming back. The one on the left is a sow thistle. It's an annual. You'd want to pull this one out before those yellow flowers turn into these fluffy seed heads that then spread seeds all over the place. And each one of those little seeds will grow another sow thistle. The bindweed on the right is a perennial. It has a very deep root. And you have to dig and get all of that root out or keep pulling off the top so that the root eventually dies. The next, let's see, I don't know why this isn't, there we go. The next categorization of plants we're going to talk about is deciduous versus evergreen. Deciduous plants are perennials that drop their leaves every year, usually in the fall or winter. Often they turn beautiful colors, like this Rogers red grapevine, which is a California native, or like many maples. Other examples of deciduous plants are rose bushes and fig trees. It's important to know if a plant is deciduous because firstly, when it drops its leaves, you don't want to think that it's dying and pull it out. It's just losing its leaves for the winter and it will come back. We do have people calling us who are worried about that. So it's important to know if it's perfectly normal behavior for a particular plant to drop its leaves. The second reason is that it might affect where you plant the plant. If you're trying to hide an ugly fence or building, then you'll want to plant an evergreen plant or a plant that keeps its leaves year round. We mostly think of deciduous plants as dropping their leaves in the fall, but some plants adapted to a Mediterranean climate go dormant in the summer instead. So you may think that your plant has died from the heat, but it's actually just gone dormant and will come back in the fall. Again, it's good to know what's normal for the plants that you are growing. And we'll take a little aside here and talk about why leaves turn color and fall off in the fall. For most plants, the leaves are where the photosynthesis takes place, where the plant converts sunlight to energy for the plant. The green pigment in leaves is chlorophyll. And during the summer, chlorophyll is continuously broken down and regenerated in the leaves of trees. But once day length becomes shorter and temperatures begin to drop, the amount of chlorophyll in leaves begins to decline, and you're able to see the other pigments in the leaves become more visible. And this reduction of green reveals yellow or orange pigment called carotenoids and are usually hidden by the abundance of chlorophyll present in leaves during the growing season. Shedding leaves helps trees to conserve water and energy. That was just kind of a little aside about what deciduous plants or why they drop their leaves. Evergreen plants, evergreen plants are perennials that stay green year round. In the coldest parts of the US, when people say evergreens, they mean pine trees because that's the only type of evergreen that is hardy there. But in milder climates like ours, we have many evergreen, broadleaf evergreens, as well as citrus trees, palm trees, star jasmine, submagnolias. One thing to know about evergreen plants is that they still drop old leaves occasionally. You'll find pine needles and tough, leathery magnolia leaves on the ground under those trees all the time. But they don't drop all their leaves at once and go dormant for the season, the way deciduous plants do. So how do you know when you walk into a nursery, how do you know what kind of plants they are? Are they annual? Are they perennial? Are they deciduous? Are they evergreen? You can't tell just by looking at the plant. You'll need to read the signs and the tags on the plants. Look in reference books or look it up on the web. If you see plants in other people's gardens, you can ask them about the plants or observe the plant over time. Why is it important to know what type of plant you're buying? Just as with the sun, water, and soil needs we discussed in class 1, the type of plant will affect where you decide to plant it, how you care for it, and whether you should buy it at all. Some examples of bad placement would be planting an annual where you really wanted something perennial, or planting a bush to block an ugly view, then finding out that it drops its leaves. So the labels on plants don't, they have quite a bit of information about the plant. They aren't consistent, is what I should say. So these are some different labels. The color has nothing to do with what kind of plant it is or anything. Some plants come with these little tags that stick into the soil next to the plant. So the bigger plants come with this label stuck on the outside of the pot. And you'll want to look at those labels carefully to determine if this is a plant that you want. And I've blown up a couple of labels in this next picture, so you can see the kind of information that's on it. The one on the left, the orange one, is for a fuchsia. The type is, or the variety is Old Berkeley. It grows 5 feet high by 4 feet wide. It likes sun on the coast or bright shade, and it takes average water. The one on the left, the one on the right is a Matalia poppy. It can get up to 8 feet high. It tolerates, that's what the TOL is, tolerates heavy soils, and it's also drought tolerant. It takes full sun, and it's hardy to 10 degrees. So as you can see, the two labels don't have, usually they'll have the final, the mature size of the plant, and they'll have the sun requirements, and they'll have the water requirements. Sometimes they have more information than that. For instance, the one on the right has a description of what the flowers look like. Okay, we're going to do a quick review of what do plants need. If people just want to type into the chat really quickly, what we learned from the last class is what are the basic needs of all plants. I'll give you a few seconds to type that in. Oh, everybody's got the sun, soil, water, and love. Good. So sun, soil, water. There was a couple other things though. Those were the main ones. And then we talked about a couple of other ones that plants needed. Okay, so nutrition. The other thing you need to worry about when you're planting a plant is that you're planting it in the appropriate climate, such that it's hardy in the zone that you're in, and space. That's why we need the mature size of the plants that are on those labels to tell us how big this plant is going to get eventually. Okay, so now Louise is going to talk about researching plants.
Thanks, Denise. So it's pretty overwhelming learning about plants if you haven't really thought about them much in the past. The way I like to look at it is that there's like one species of human, Homo sapiens, and I know a lot about humans and what I need to live. There are some 330 plus thousand species of plants, and each species has its own distinct requirements. So that's one reason why plants can be really confusing. But you can go a long ways in learning about plants by doing some research. The thing I'd really want to encourage you to do is to go see plants in person. Don't do all your research online. Nurseries are fantastic places to go. We have a few pretty darn good independent nurseries around our area. And I'll just mention Summer Winds, which is a local independent chain, and Yamagami's is one people know about. And then over a Half Moon Bay way, there are quite a few nurseries that you can visit over there. Santa Cruz has some great nurseries, and just in general, there's a lot of really good nurseries in our area and that you can go and visit at different times of year, browse around without buying. Just really try to use the nursery as a place to learn about plants. Check out how they've arranged plants, because they will arrange them in really pretty ways so you can see which plants look great together and stuff like that. And you can see small and big versions of the same plant at a nursery, oftentimes kind of get a sense for how big they can get. And of course, you can read the labels. At these nurseries, the staff is going to be eager to help you. So go with your questions, be armed with notes that you want to answer, and just ask them lots of questions about what kind of situation that the plants will grow in and that kind of thing. Again, staff is really good at these nurseries. Let's see, visit arboretums and demonstration gardens. And these two pictures are demonstration gardens that are kept up by the master gardeners. But there are also all kinds of great arboretums in our area. There's the San Francisco Botanical Garden in Golden Gate Park. There's the University of California Botanical Gardens at Berkeley. Filoli in Woodside is a gorgeous garden. If you've never been there, Filoli is really fun. San Jose has a municipal rose garden, which is really beautiful. And there's also the Japanese Friendship Garden in San Jose. And another Japanese garden is Hakone in Saratoga. Hakone Gardens is quite beautiful, especially in the springtime. If you go to the Master Gardener website, you'll see the list of our demonstration gardens. which again, these two pictures of our Master Gardener demonstration gardens, and the website shows when we're open and when you can go visit them and ask people about the plants. And then if you're ever in Los Angeles, don't miss the Huntington Botanical Gardens. They are an amazing place, very much worth a special visit. There are lots of garden tours you can do, like the one that is really getting to be well known around here is the Going Native Garden Tour. So keep an eye out for garden tours where you can go look at plants. And then while you're out there looking at plants, take lots of pictures with your phone. I've taken to annotating the pictures with the name of the plant, both the common name and the Latin name, so that I can ask about that particular plant later on. Yeah, having photos is super helpful. And then if you're trying to ID a plant, getting a photo is great. And then you can send the photo to our help desk asking for an ID, or you could show the photo. For instance, maybe you have a plant in your yard that you don't know what it is. You could take that photo of that plant to the nursery and show the picture to someone on the staff there and say, hey, I've got this plant, I don't know what it is. And they'll go, oh, I know what that is. That's a bay laurel tree. And that way you'll be able to learn about what plants you've got and how to identify them by using your nursery as a resource. Let's see, definitely remember to get the name. That's really important. And on the handout for this class, for class 2, there's quite a lot of resources on a resource page that lists some of these arboretums and gardens. And there's a page or a link for the garden tour, the Going Native Garden Tour, and some of those other things that you'll want to learn about. Of course, all of us are going to use the internet to do plant research. Again, I'd really like you to go outside and do it in person, but also go back to your computer and do some research about these plants. But when you do that, it's really important to remember where you are. You're in the California Mediterranean climate, and most of the rest of the world is not in that climate. And so when you do internet searches, you will often get results that are more generic, and they are related to Eastern US or United Kingdom gardening sites. And they often recommend plants that will not thrive in the California climate, in our California climate. For instance, I did a search, I just Googled flowering shrub, and I got these 5 plants. None of these plants, they're gorgeous, but none of these plants would look particularly good in, or do particularly well in our climate without special attention. So again, it's a caution when you're doing internet searches. Definitely you want to make sure that you're aware of the climate that they are recommending these plants for. Also, internet searches, there's a ton of YouTube videos, there's a ton of TikToks about plants. Some of them are pretty funny. There's Pinterest boards, there's blog sites about gardening. There are some really good ones, but there are also a lot that are just really shallow, don't give you very much information, or it's very vague. So really be a skeptic when you use the internet to do your plant searches. And in particular, we suggest adding a .edu, a .org, or the term UCANR to your search. EDU will give you educational resources, org will give you nonprofit ones. If you add UCANR to your search, that will give you the University of California Ag and Natural Resources, which is what we are part of. And so the responses that you get from your search will be more authoritative, more science-based, and you can rely on them better. It also helps to add terms like drought tolerant, California native, low water, or something like that to narrow down your search and make sure you get references to plants that are going to work for you. And let's see what I wanted to do. I just saw that pop up in the chat, and lo and behold. One of the things that I like for, and any native plant enthusiast in California loves is Cowscape. And I just want to give you an example of a really, really great site with that from this site, you can glean what any other site is missing, because Cowscape has it all. So I am going to, let me see, I just lost my train of thought here. I'm going to show you about a plant that I particularly like. It's called blue-eyed grass. And show you what it looks like. Oops, where's my, there we go. Let me just make sure I'm sharing this properly. I'm going to do this again. There we go. So this is the Cowscape site. It's cowscape.org. And for all the native plants that they've categorized in California are here. And you can see on the right, it shows you where the plant grows native. You can see some really great pictures of it. Lots and lots of great information on Cowscape. You can see, I don't know if you can see my mouse here. It shows you nurseries that carry that plant. So if you need to order that plant, that can help you out. But I also really wanted to point out down here a little farther is how much information there is available about the type of plant, how big it's going to get, what it's going to look like, whether it goes dormant in the summer or the winter and loses its leaves or not, how much water it needs here, how much sun it needs. Just there's all the information you could want here. It even has like the sunset zones down here. So if you live in sunset zone 15, wow, look, blue-eyed grass would be great for you. Again, try Cowscape for researching plants if you want to look at native plants. And let's see, Bob, I'm going to ask you to share the slides again. Okay. So we also wanted to just show you some of our favorite books. Books are still great resources. The Sunset Western Garden book, Wildly Successful Plants for Northern California, Plants and Landscapes for Summer Climate are all really wonderful books. They're all out of print. But if you can snag one at a thrift shop or from a used bookstore, grab it, because they are really great resources. Another one by this author, Pam Pierce, at the bottom is called Golden Gate Gardening, and it's particularly good for vegetable gardening in our region. And then in the middle here, you can see the UC Davis Arboretum All-Stars. It is a website, and it has a really great list of plants that are really great in our climate, then that are also shown to be relatively easier to grow. And then I just want to encourage you, when you are doing research, think about the kind of function you want your plants to fill for you. So you could search on plants that attract butterflies, or plants that attract butterflies in Northern California, .uc.edu, or plants that are great ground covers in Northern California, that kind of thing. And you'll get better lists of information for yourself, and there'll be plants that will be more appropriate to our climate. This particular picture is from the Sunset Western Garden book, and again, it's a great list of plants that attract butterflies, and it's really specific to our region. Other ideas that you could Google on, like plants for shade, trees for a patio, what kind of ornamental edibles are there out there, that kind of thing. So lots of different ways that you can do your research. So again, research your plants, and it'll help you be a better gardener. And now Denise is going to talk a little bit about design.
Okay. Actually, what I'm going to do is show a few websites that have design ideas. And the first one I'm going to show is the UC Davis one. These links are in the handout that we gave you, but this is the one for UC Davis Arboretum, and I'm going to share the screen. So this is the UC Davis Arboretum website, and they have a list of planting plans. And I'm going to look at these three down here, the California Native Planting Plan, the Low Maintenance Planting Plan, and the Wildlife Planting Plan. These are all based on a 10-foot by 10-foot space where you want to grow something. So this is the Low Maintenance Planting Plan. And you can see from this design, this is pretty elaborate. They're using fancy colors and frilly shapes to designate the different plants. But the basic idea is to somehow indicate how big the plants will be when they're mature so that you can be sure and give them enough room. Also, we want to point out the use of repeated plants. This pine muley is repeated 3 times. It's often a good idea in a design to repeat plants 1, 3, or 5 times. I should say mass them in groups of 3, 5 or more. And also massing fewer kinds of plants is generally more attractive than planting one each of several different kinds of plants. You'll note here the center dot in each of these plants. That's used for spacing. This purple bottle brush looks like it's about 6 feet wide when mature. The pine muley looks like it's about 4 feet wide when mature. So 6 and 4 would be 10 feet. You want to put these dots 5 feet apart. So you want to add the 2 mature widths of the plant and divide it by 2 to decide how far apart to put them. And you can see these other plants, the Nepeta, the catmint and the California fuchsia are smaller plants. So that same area planted with California native plants might look something a little more like this. They're using some of the same plants. They still have a Muhlenbergia or a deergrass this time. It's a slightly different variety. But again, they have one feature plant, here a toyon, and then they've masked the other plants around it. Again, with the different sizes of the plants at maturity. So that's a couple of ideas. Another website to go to is the South Bay Green Gardens website. And this one also has landscape designs. They have a water-wise garden design, and they have inspired designs, for instance, a small sunny yard. And again, they've shown the mature sizes of the plants. So they've done the labeling separately, but the blue one is what is the blue one? The blue one is a PH. PH is penstemon, a Margarita Bopp penstemon. And they've repeated that plant several times throughout. And they've done the similar thing with the other plants. And this website also has some notes about why they like this garden, what the watering needs are, and some more information. And again, it's just to get inspired. And a lot of you I know are interested in vegetable gardening. So I'm going to go to this site first. This is from Renee's Garden, which is it's a seed company. So it is a commercial site, but they do have this link called Gardening Resources. And they have garden plans here. So for instance, they have a long summer, mild winter garden. And this actually shows it's a 18 by 14 foot area. It's got a spring planting guide, a summer planting guide, and then a fall planting guide. And down below, they list all the plants that they planted. So the main thing to notice here is that you can see that you can get a lot of radishes, which are fairly small plants. But something like kale is going to be bigger. I think that's kale. And you won't have as many plants. That's chard. Okay. So planting your vegetable garden has the same considerations of space. You need to know how big the plant is going to be when it's mature to decide how many of that plant you can plant. And one other resource for vegetable gardening. This is from the Sonoma County Master Gardener's website. It's called Planting an Intensive Garden. And it has an intensive spacing guide. So this tells you how far apart you want to put various crops. And this is for intensive gardening. Intensive gardening is a little bit like square foot gardening. You're putting plants closer together to minimize weeds. They won't get as big, but you'll cover the soil and you can get more yield. Even though the individual plants don't get as big, you have more plants. You can't crowd them too much though. And this is kind of a layout for plants. Again, spring, mid-season, and fall, and it has the plants down here. So that's just to get you inspired. All right, Bob, can you go back to sharing the screen? You. So we looked at UC Davis Arboretum and South Bay Green Gardens. Here's something that's a lot simpler, more along the lines of what Louise showed earlier, is you don't have to be all elaborate. The main thing you have to note is the mature size of the plant. For instance, here they've noted the size of the vegetable bed they want. They haven't put sizes here, but I assume this lemon tree is 6 feet. Probably this tree is the same size. Maybe this plant is half the size, but you want to make those circles indicate the final size of the plant. The other thing you want to consider when you're laying out your plants is the hydrozones. And that's the practice of grouping plants that have similar water needs. So for instance, your vegetables should be grouped together because they're going to have pretty similar water needs, and your drought tolerant plants would be grouped together in a low water area, and maybe some ornamental shrubs that you have would be in a medium water area. Okay, and now I'm going to turn it over to Paul.
All right, so this is where we get to practice with some of the stuff we've been learning. So we've got a scavenger hunt and making a plant list. So you've got a handout, so you don't need to screenshot this, although you can if you like. And the first job is going to be finding out your USDA climate zone. Remember, the climate zone is the minimum average temperature in winter. So, for example, zone 9B is around about 20 degrees, is the lowest. So you'll go online, find a zone map, and figure out what yours is. Now, it actually does vary, even over quite small distances. For example, I'm in Saratoga, and if I go just about 2 miles west of here, I move from zone B up to 10B, which is a warmer climate. And then if I go another 2 miles south, it ends up heading towards Ben Lomond, which is quite a cool area. So it's worth digging around and finding exactly where you are on that. For a bonus, you can find out your sunset zone, which does vary a lot throughout the Bay Area. So the rest are more online searches. So we've got a bird attracts to pineapple guava. We've got an interesting garden design. So going back to what Louise said, this is a great opportunity to look both online and actually out in the world. So anytime you see something, just stop by, take some photos, take some notes, and then see if you can figure out what you particularly like about it and whether you might be able to replicate that at home. So going back to the Cowscape or any other site you find online that would work, is finding a scientific name for a seaside daisy. And then we have a small deciduous tree native to California, and a vegetable to grow in the fall, winter, or spring. I mean, you can do all three if you like. So a plant list. Create a wish list of 4 to 5 plants that you might like to grow. And these could include things that you already have and you just want to learn to maintain. So see if you can figure out what their sun, soil, space, and water requirements are. And if you already have those, are they, is it meeting their needs? So things to think about. Louise mentioned this earlier, like what is your garden for? And do these plants attract bees, butterflies, other beneficial creatures like pollinators, such as hummingbirds? So there's a couple of suggestions for search queries that will help narrow down your search. And there we are. I'll pass it back to Bob for the outro.
Okay, so I guess we can entertain, let me get this. Questions, Anne? Anne, are there any questions?
Yes, I have some questions. I'm sorry, I was just typing. I have some questions to address to Susan about the her starting seeds.
Sure.
Which brand of organic seeds is good and where do we buy it from?
Well, as master gardeners, we don't recommend particular brands of seeds, and we don't necessarily recommend organic seeds. You want to find seeds that are from a reliable, well-known company, or seeds that you've actually gotten from somebody else who has grown them successfully and knows how to save their seeds. The seeds that I started here in my little box were from 2 different companies, both reputable companies. Both of these seeds, these are actually seeds that were sent to me in 2020. So 2 years later, they are still viable seeds, as the same with the radish. You just want to get your seeds from a reputable company. And other than that, they do or do not have to be organic, depending upon whether or not you are trying to do a totally organic garden.
Thank you. I have another 2 questions related to starting seeds in pots. Did you keep them covered with plastic with the holes in it the whole week? When did you remove the plastic?
I didn't cover these at all.
Oh, you
I
did? Okay.
No, I did not cover these at all. I just took these 2 pots and I put them outside on my picnic table where they enjoy the outside elements of outside. No cover on these. Neither of these 2 plants require that. When I'm sprouting tomato seeds, I will often put on one of those domes in order to keep the warmth inside, but not for these seeds.
Neat. Okay. One more question. How much did you water the seedlings?
The soil that I planted them in was lightly moist already from the bag, so it was not bone dry. I planted the seeds and I used my watering can. And I watered the seeds in until the water came out of the bottom of the pot. And then I drained the container that the pot was in. I didn't let the pot sit in the water. And then I observed the seeds outside, and whenever I saw that the surface of the seeds pot was drying out, I added a little bit more water. Remember, these seeds are in a very very narrow depth of soil. So I planted the radish seeds 1/4 of an inch down. So that topsoil is going to dry out fairly quickly in the type of weather we've been having for the past week. So you just have to watch it and
Okay.
don't let the pot sit in the water. That is sort of crucial. You don't want them to be waterlogged.
So Ann, can I add a little something to that?
Yes, because I know Bob starts a lot of tomatoes by seed.
Yeah, I probably have like 400 tomato seedlings and I give them all away. But the point of all this, the one thing that just breaks my heart is it's called damping off.
Mhm.
And it's caused by a couple of things. One, if you don't completely disinfect a used pot or you use soil from the garden, anyway, you really have to use new potting soil. And I also tend to water from the bottom. You want to get seed starter, that is basically somewhat soilless. I also put a fan in there so they don't get, you circulate the air, you don't have any kind of foliar diseases. So anyway, damping off will break your heart. So you have to be very careful not to overwater, to have the right soil structure, the seed starter, and put them in an environment that there's some air circulation as well as some grow light. So anyway, that's kind of what I do.
Thank you. And now I have a question for Louise. And this was, I thought this was a particularly interesting question. They said, when a plant goes dormant, basically, like a perennial plant, I believe it was when you were talking about perennials, what watering do you have then? Do you water it or not?
Well, it depends on the plant. Denise, you might want to kick in here too. It always depends on the plant, right? Plants that go dormant in the wintertime are generally going dormant when it's raining or snowing in the winter. So they naturally are getting water anyhow. Plants in California, in our climate, some of them go dormant in the summertime because it's dry. So if you watered them, they might actually come out of dormancy when they shouldn't. A good example of that would be the California buckeye. It loses all its leaves in the summer. It goes brown and loses its leaves. That's because it's dry. It's summer dormant. It's not dead. It's just dried out. So you wouldn't water that one. So that's something you need to research so that you know more about the particular plant that you're dealing with. Hope that helped.
Yeah. I think there's no way out of researching the plant with that. And then we have there was a landscaping question down here. I can't find it, but I know it had to do with when you put in your landscaping with regard to how large the plants will go. Eventually, you'll have a very sparsely planted garden at first. And they said, they asked about some people just make it more crowded and then transplant plants afterwards. What would be your advice if you don't like that sparse look?
That's true, that you want to allow for the final size of the plant. So you can do one of two things. You can, like they said, plant more and plan on thinning them out as they get bigger. The other thing you can do is fill in with annuals or some smaller plant that you plan on pulling out once the main plant gets bigger.
And here's a question, maybe this is to Bob. Bob said water from the bottom. That seems different when we heard about the seedlings. When do we do this?
Well, I'm basically talking about tomatoes seedlings. What Susan is doing is just with the peas. I think there's less chance of damping off with that, but I think she started with sterilizers, good potting soil. But the point of all is when I start the seeds, I have a pretty moist potting soil, and I don't water until after they come up, because usually there's enough water in the cell to sustain the germination. So the watering happens after. And the other thing to remember is once they start growing, they're going to start reaching for the sun. That's when you start moving them into a south-facing window. or they'll get very leggy. So hopefully that kind of addresses some of the question. It kind of depends on the plant itself too.
So here's an interesting question too about trees. Maybe Denise, you could try this one. I'm trying to understand how to be really sure when a tree is dead versus having a tough year. I haven't seen this kind of information included where I've researched trees, plants. Is there a good way to learn indicators of a dying tree to avoid having to call out an arborist?
Well, if it's a deciduous tree, right now, it probably doesn't have any leaves. If it's not a deciduous tree and the leaves look not very healthy, you might want to talk to an arborist. Otherwise, you can just wait and see if it leaves out in the spring. If there's a branch you can reach, you can try cutting a little bit of the branch and looking inside to see if it's green inside, or even just scratching a little bit on the bark, on a thinner bark, and see if it's still green. I don't know, is there anything else people would recommend?
Yeah, one of the other things is the cambium, the secondary meristem, that will shrink. And what you'll see is the bark will start to peel off because the cambium is shrinking. So that's another indication that tree's not going to make it.
Yeah. Let's see if I think that covers the one in the. Oh, here's another one about pruning.
Yeah.
Can you prune naturally large shrubs to a smaller size? For example, I like rock rose, but they don't want to let it grow to its full size.
Some shrubs can be pruned, and it should tell you when you do your research whether it tolerates pruning or shearing or that sort of thing. The problem is you're going to be out there pruning it all the time. You might look for a rock rose that's naturally smaller. There are a few. If you do a bit of research, you may be able to find one that's naturally smaller. I also love rock roses and don't have space for them. And then I think the question also included fruit trees. Fruit trees, you probably won't mind spending so much time pruning them because you're getting fruit from them. And they do tend to get pretty big, and you do have to prune them every year. But that's expected with a fruit tree. With a landscaping shrub, it depends on how much you want to be out there pruning.
Yeah.
Can I add a reference to, there's a fabulous book called Grow a Little Fruit Tree that talks specifically about maintaining fruit trees at a manageable size.
Right, that's what I'm doing in my front garden. I planted an orchard of 13 trees in probably a 25 by 25 space. But they are not any of them taller than taller than my neck. I'm keeping them really short. And I do that by summer pruning.
When the summer comes, I'm sure we'll be having demonstrations of summer pruning in some of the Master Gardener gardens. And you could go see that. There are questions about watering in a dry winter. I know that's something I've been wondering about all the time. And Jen, this month and last month, what you need to do then.
I've been out watering.
Yeah, I remember being told a long time ago that California natives expect to get their water during the winter, and you want to make every year a good winter for them, which means if it doesn't rain, you need to water them. But once it starts getting warm, you don't want to water too much because they don't like warmth and water. Cool and water is fine.
Yeah,
It's the thing about watering, and we will talk about watering in other classes, is just remember to look at the dirt, look at the soil, and see if it's moist. If it's moist, you probably don't need to water.
so you're getting lots of questions about mushrooms at the base of trees. Who wants to answer that? Well, Louise?
It's not a good sign. It's not a good sign. If I had a valuable tree with mushrooms, large valuable tree with mushrooms coming out of the base, I'd be getting an arborist in really fast. Mushrooms are an indication of generally of dead wood. So yeah, I don't know a lot about it, but I would think that you would want to be really careful about that and get an arborist if it's a valuable tree. If it's not, I'd rip the tree out and put something else in.
Yeah, I think you're talking about where the mushrooms are obviously coming out of the base of a tree, because sometimes in a wet year, you'll get a lot of mushrooms in the lawn or whatever, and that's just,
Yeah, that's different. Yeah.
yeah,
Also, if you have wood mulch, you might get.
that's right, yeah, yeah, because it grows in the wood mulch. Let's-
Also grows if you put out too many alfalfa pellets.
yes, they get moldy. So I know you have an avocado, Susan, so maybe you want to answer this. I planted an avocado tree 3 years ago. It's green, but it hasn't grown. Any suggestions?
I have an avocado tree. It's true. It's a very productive avocado tree, but it's probably about 70 years old. So I don't know its genesis. But avocado trees are slow growers. And it will depend upon where your avocado tree is. Is it in the ground? Is it in a pot? What variety of avocado tree is it? Some of them are much smaller avocado trees than others. It really depends upon the type of avocado tree you have chosen and where it is in your garden. I wouldn't worry too much so long as it still looks healthy. It is, as I said, a slow grower to start off with, but once it gets going, it will go well.
Then
And
there's
there's plenty of BLT sandwiches.
Susan grows wonderful avocados. So there's a question about an Italian pine. They ask if it grows large. I believe the answer is yes, the ones I know. And it's probably not a good candidate for a container. Do you think? Does anybody have an opinion on that? Because they mention that connection with a container. I know.
Would that be a stone pine, an Italian stone pine?
Yes.
Those are very big plants.
Yeah.
A good example of them, they've got a couple of them at Philoli that they replanted after a big one came down, and they're already 30 feet tall, and they replanted them maybe 10 years ago.
Yeah. Let's see. How do you keep fruit from being eaten by local varmints such as squirrels? That's something we all deal with. Susan, do you want to? Because I know.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, Bob, maybe you want to.
Yeah.
Oh, well, okay. I have, let me apologize in advance. Any animal that impacts my produce, it's a capital offense. And so I have, I trap squirrels, and because they do damage to my raised beds. They love raised beds. So it's kind of up to you and how much damage you're willing to accept. But I have zero tolerance for squirrels in my yard.
And we are going to discuss pest control a little bit later on in either class 3 or 4.
Yeah.
And that IPM is a tremendous site.
Yes. Yeah. And we have some questions that there's so many questions for which the answer is it depends. Like somebody asked here about when is it okay to move seedlings outside after danger of frost? What exactly is the temperature of frost? That's 32 degrees Fahrenheit, right? Or 0 degree.
Right.
I know where I live in San Jose, we haven't had a frost in years.
Yeah.
But some other parts of Santa Clara Valley do get.
You know, the other point, I mean, moving a seedling outside, there's a term, it's called hardening off.
Mm-hmm.
And what you have to do is you don't just take your seedlings out of the greenhouse or the south-facing window and put it in the ground. That's not a good idea. So what you do is you gradually increase the exposure that it has outside the sun. So when you take it right out, giving it 8 hours of sun is not going to be good for that seedling. So again, it's something you do gradually. And again, the term is hardening off. You can do some research on there. So
I see that specific question also talks about a bottle gourd plant that tolerates 70 degrees. And gourds really like warm weather. They are not going to like it outside in February. No way. So yeah, I would wait till the weather is much warmer, more like May before I put a bottle gourd outside, personally.
So some people are looking for the website where you had the plans. Is that Arboretum, UC Davis?
UC Davis Arboretum. It's in the link is in the handout, but if they just do UC Davis Arboretum and then look for plans, they'll find
I'll
it.
put it in the chat, but it is in the handout too.
We are going to talk about plants getting eaten by other things next week.
Yeah.
Yes, and meanwhile, take a look at the IPM website at ucanr.edu. That's excellent. And also there were the questions about trees. I was thinking, this is in your handout too, but there's a home orchard website also on UCANR that's very good about fruit trees and explain what we mean by summer pruning and winter pruning. I think that's it. We could probably, oh, here's another
Let's
one.
see a couple more.
Yeah, go ahead, Louise.
Well, someone asked,
Oh,
someone asked, is it okay to grow it in the ground instead of a raised bed? Absolutely. You do not have to grow plants in a raised bed.
Yes,
People have been growing plants in the ground forever.
yes, I know. When I moved here like 22 years ago, I was surprised how everybody was growing it in raised beds. And we have just put a lot of compost on, we took the sod off and then we just added a lot of compost and we've grown good vegetables that way.
Oh, there's a thing about the killing the squirrels. The other thing that's effective is excluding them from the area. Okay, so you build barriers, fences and what have you to keep them out. So you don't always have to go to the capital extreme.
That's right, yeah. They are very clever though.
It's
Very clever.
And they're more patient.
Okay, we got a new message here. Oh, they're asking about what I'm saying is here. I'll type it in here. That's it stands for UC Agriculture and Natural Resources. That's the department at University of California that includes the Master Gardener program. I'm trying to search for what is it called, the county and the, help me, what we're part of the
county extension.
Yes, that's what I'm looking for. Thank you. Extension. And the UCANR is the part of the university that reach it. Thank you very much, Catherine. That's exactly, yeah. So the cooperative extension is part of UCANR, and the cooperative extension is the university's ways to reach out to the public. And Master Gardeners is one of the ways they do that. So you'll find all sorts of things that just put in your browser ucanr.edu and you'll find a lot of information.
I see another question about from Tricia about seed packets giving instructions on when to plant based on first and last frost. And that is usually very much East Coast focused, or sorry, everywhere except California focused. So I posted into the chat the Master Gardener vegetable planting chart, and you can just go to the Master Gardener website and search for the vegetable planting chart, and it'll give you really, really good guidelines about when to plant what vegetables in our climate.
Mm-hmm. And then there's a question about moisture meters. I wasn't that, if it's the kind where you just stick a metal probe in the ground, I did not find that so helpful over just taking a trowel and, making a little hole and feeling it. But do others, do any of you feel differently?
No, they just make you feel like you're doing something when they're not necessarily giving you a result that you will find helpful. When
Yeah.
I was using one in potted plants, it always told me it was wet, and then they died. So,
Yeah, I think using your own senses is probably a better way to
Yeah.
do.
I mean, if you had one that was a real professional one, that's a different deal than the one you buy for $15. Professional moisture meters actually do work, but
Mhm.
those are in the hundreds of dollars.
Okay, any other questions? I think we've covered it.